Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Alеше, and I'm the Teacher of Science and Religion. And on behalf of the Ian Ramsey Centre, one of the sponsoring institutions for tonight, I'd just like to welcome you and say how delighted we are both by the eminence of our speaker and the exciting nature of the topic tonight. I think it's going to be a fascinating evening for us all. One of our concerns is fostering a dialogue between science and the wider culture and religion, and we've no doubt that this evening's lecture is going to do exactly that. So I have a privilege of welcoming you to this audience, but I hand over now to my colleague who's going to introduce our speaker and also give you a welcome on behalf of the other sponsoring institution tonight.
Good evening, thank you. My name is Mikołaj Sławkowski-Rodę, and together with Ralph Weir, we'd like to welcome you on behalf of the Institute of Philosophy at the University of Warsaw and Blackfriars Hall, which together with the Ian Ramsey Centre are collaborating on the Humane Philosophy project which we represent. But most of all, to welcome our speaker this evening, Hьюберт Дрейфус. Hьюберт Дрейфus is a professor at the University of California, Berkeley. And among other distinctions, he was elected a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in 2001. He was awarded the Harbison Prize by the University of California, as well as receiving an honorary doctorate from the University of Erasmus, or Erasmus University. His interests include philosophy of psychology and the philosophical implications of artificial intelligence. And perhaps his most widely read and recognized book is the 1972 What Computers Still Can't Do, which was followed 20 years later by What Computers Still Can't Do. Among his other interests are phenomenology and existentialism, and his famous exegesis of Martin Heidegger has become recognized under the name Dreidegger. And tonight, of course, another interest of Professor Дрейфus is going to be the focus on the talk, which is the philosophy of literature. And his talk, focused on Dostoevsky, will perhaps be the witness to the birth of Dreytoyevsky. So please give a very, very warm welcome to our eminent speaker this evening, Professor Hьюберт Дрейфus.
So this is going to be relatively simple once you get the key to it. I think the Brothers Karamazov has been largely misunderstood. I mean, I know the Grand Inquisitor story is totally misunderstood, but that's a subject for another lecture. But what I want to say today is that Dostoevsky's got one important preoccupation, and as he puts it, and I read it here. Father Piazzi, one of the monks, who was sort of fathering Alyosha around, says to Alyosha, the science of this world has become a great power, has analyzed everything divine, and after this cruel analysis, we have nothing left of what was sacred of old. Now, that's serious. I mean, if it's true that science is wiping out the sacred, then the culture is in for a very bad time. But there's a sort of hint almost immediately. Well, it happens at the very end of the book, but it could have happened at the very beginning of the book. We find out the Father Zosima saying, people talk to you a great deal about your education, but some good, sacred memory. I mean, stressing sacred, because we were just told by Father Piazzi that the sacred has been wiped out. Now Zosima is telling Alyosha that some good, sacred memory preserved from childhood is perhaps the best education. Now, that's a kind of hint of the answer. In some way, something must be going on in which science is flourishing, and I think everybody's agreeing about that, from the monks on the one hand to Ivan, a kind of fan of Western science on the other, that it's clear what's going on with science, but what isn't clear is what's going on with the sacred memory business. Is the sacred wiped out, or isn't the sacred wiped out? And it takes a while to collect the clues, but the one clue is that what you find in what happens in the book, and you all have your handout. We're number 2 now on the handout, where we read that Alеше remembers one still summer evening, an open window, the slanting rays of the setting sun, that he recalled most vividly of all. I sort of put that aside as a question within the question. I can't talk about everything at once, but what in the world is this about this slanting rays of the sun, which is the most vivid thing that Alеше remembers? He doesn't remember the sun, sort of the glorious light of the Supreme Being. He remembers the slanting rays, mostly often of the setting sun in the book. It's 7 times Dostoevsky talks about these slanting rays, and it's important to figure out what he's thinking about. But let's finish it. So he's remembering the slanting rays of the setting sun, that he recalled most vividly of all. In a corner of the room, the holy image, and on her knees before the image, his mother, sobbing hysterically, praying to the Mother of God, holding him up in both arms to the image, as though putting him under the mother's protection. Somehow, something that his mother is doing for him, when she does this, is making his life really safer and more loving. It's her passing on to him this possibility of a loving relationship in the chain of loving relationships that Dostoevsky talks about as the onion chain, for reasons that I can't go into right now. But what's happening here is something that we don't really understand yet, but the clue comes in a very strange place, and it comes in a very strange way. This is number 2 on the handout, the part that about the German doctor. I'm going on to read now. Besides this story about Alеше and his mother, something similar happens. Somebody makes some act of love to somebody, of caring about them, and that makes a big difference in their lives. It happens here with the German doctor. The German doctor tells how he, the German doctor, brought Dmitri a pound of nuts, for no one before had ever brought the boy a pound of nuts. And then the doctor says, and this is the clue to everything that's going to go on from now on, though it's a very mysterious clue, out of nowhere and almost laughably, the doctor goes on, having given the boy a pound of nuts, he says, and I lifted my finger and said to him, boy, got their Vater? He laughed and said, got their Vater? Got their son? He laughed and again lisped, got their son? And their Heilige Geist. And what is going on there? What happened? Well, he was baptized. Only you can't tell exactly. It's a funny way of being baptized, but why is the German doctor giving him this connection with loving relationships, the first he's ever had, and telling it in the name of saying, in the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit? Well, it's obviously a clue that there is some kind of experience of the passing on of love and protection and caring, which Alesche's mother passes it on to him, and the German doctor passing it on to Dmitri. And that connection is that they're put in the connectedness network of everybody with everybody. That's what's going on with the rays of sun, I think. Later, Dostoevsky says, there seem to be threads from all those innumerable worlds of God, linking his soul to them, and it was trembling all over in contact with other worlds. That's the extreme of this connectedness. But all of this connectedness takes place in a way which is related to being baptized. They're all connected with getting connected with connectedness that Dostoevsky thinks is what's ultimately important, and the rays of light show up again and again, and they always show up where love is being passed on. So you're now down to looking still under number 2, but I'm to what I'm calling an apostolic succession of sorts, because it isn't about bishops, but it's about how love gets passed on from Markel to Alyosha. Zosima says, I remember I went once into Markel's room, and there were no one else, and it was a bright evening, the sun was setting, the whole room was lighted up, that's the rays again. He beckoned me and I went up to him, he put his hand on my shoulders and looked into my face tenderly, lovingly. He said nothing for a minute, only looked at me like that. Well, he said, run and play now, enjoy life for me too. Markel is really the Jesus figure in the book, and he's really passing on agape love to Alyosha, to Zosima. Sorry, Markel is passing it on to Zosima, and Dostoevsky makes it clear, well, sort of clear, that something goes on in which something sacred is happening. Even though there's plenty to be pessimist about, that science may be wiping out the sacred, the science has certainly not wiped out the sacred. It happened when Alyosha's mother held her up to the icon, and it happened when the doctor gave Dmitri the pound of nuts and said a blessing over him. And whenever it does, it's sort of taken up by Dostoevsky in a way where something sacred happens which doesn't violate the laws of physics and chemistry. So baptism isn't some kind of magical putting of holy water on a baby. Baptism is somehow doing some caring something that gets somebody in relation to this whole network of caring. And that's why the doctor's quote is there, and that's why baptism is in the story. It puts baptism in a non-magical way does what baptism might do in a kind of magical way, but in a non-magical way, baptism is anything that happens that puts people into the religious dimension, passed on the love, the chain of agape love to them. And now comes the fun part. I mean, it already looks like Dostoevsky has a peculiar feature, which you've already heard it because I just said it, but I'm going to say it again. When he does one of these jobs of describing some sacred Christian practice and showing that it's not against the laws of physics and chemistry, but it has a transforming power, when he does that, he tells you that that's what he's done. That's why in the world the German doctor just suddenly creeps up and pops up in the story and does the talk over the baptized child, is that it's telling us, and that's what the whole book is going to tell you, in about 25 different places. I was going to make a whole list of them, but it got so long I didn't do it. But anyway, all these Christian sacraments, practices, experiences, sort of the phenomenology of the Christian sacred is what Dostoevsky's really interested in. And if he can do it, if he can show that the Christian sacred is still, so to speak, alive and well, even though science is thriving too, he will have done what he needs to do. And the question is to follow how he does it. And every time he does it, you'll find some clue, sometimes much clearer than the clues I've told you so far, that he knows that's what he's done. And now that's what we want to do, is now get a clear clue, which is more than a clue. It sort of hits you over the head. And Dostoevsky tells you, look, here's the sacred doing the job of the sacred right in front of you, and I'll just name it. Well, so let's say he takes on another Christian belief or practice or whatever, and something that believing in miracles. Now, surely Dostoevsky is not going to try to say, is he, that miracles are sacred? I mean, miracles are supposed to be exactly not in. Well, he could say miracles are sacred. I'm sorry, but what he can't say is that miracles obey the laws of physics and chemistry. They're supposed to be the breakthrough against physics and chemistry, is that there are miracles. But Dostoevsky's going to pull it off so that there are going to be miracles, and they're going to not break the laws of physics and chemistry, but they're going to do a certain miracle job, and you're supposed to see it. And so here's where you're going to see it, on page 320 is too late, and this is too early. So let's look. It's only going to be on 320. Where's my copy of it, brother? You have my copy? I have my copy. Let's look at 320 and see what's there. Okay, what happens is a complicated part of the plot that Rakitin brings Alyosha to Grushenka. It turns out she's going to pay Grushenka. Rakitin, who is the devil figure in the book, by the way, and he always says, when Rakitin says something, he often says, and the devil only knows. And it turns out to be something that only Rakitin knows, because he's some evil thing up to. And here is, now we're going to find out that when Alyosha lets Rakitin get him to drink alcohol and eat meat, and finally go to be seduced by Grushenka, and Rakitin is feeling very pleased about all that. And it turns out that, and Rakitin is sort of laughing and thinking of how the fall of Alyosha is going to be, and then Rakitin makes the mistake of saying, his elder stinks. And that's just exactly the thing that's driving Alyosha crazy and into despair, is that Father Zosima's body is not performing a miracle against the laws of physics and chemistry. In fact, his body remains purer and more perfectly, doesn't smell a bit, even though the weather is warm and the windows are closed and so forth. And Dostoevsky lays all that out so that you can understand the physics and chemistry of it. But Zosima's body is really decomposing in just a normal way in a normal time. But it's been interpreted by the enemies of Zosima to be that it shows that Zosima wasn't really a saint, or at least an elder, and it shows that there's nothing happens against the laws of physics and chemistry. And if this is going to be a story about a miracle, I'm telling you, it's going to be a pretty strange one, because the chances of there being the miracles that show that the Zosima's body decomposing is good, or miracles showing it's bad. Dostoevsky goes out of his way to show that in the case of Zosima, the windows were closed, there were, is that right? No flowers, that's right. And it was a hot day. And then finally maybe Zosima does stink, but that's all right, because it's just the laws of physics and chemistry. It has no deep significance, and that's fine. But the important thing that this is all a kind of subplot in the story about what happens when Alyosha, when Rakitin says to Alyosha that his father stinks, and the elder Zosima stinks, and Alyosha goes into a kind of crash, Grushenka feels sorry for him and she sort of picks him up and gets him to sit on her lap. And she did that a little earlier in the story. But anyway, she's sitting on his lap, and now he sees how sorry they are. Who is? How sorry Alyosha is, and Alyosha sees how sorry Grushenka is over the death of Zosima, and then comes the part I want to talk about. But after all that, what happens is something where there is that Alyosha feels a feeling of the intensest and purest interest. That's on 320. Is it 320? Yes, 320. But we haven't got to the punchline yet. And that look is, again, this passing on of agape love. Only now it's called this intense and purest interest. But the interesting thing I wanted to just show you is, remember I've said Dostoevsky, when he does baptism, makes it clear that he's talking about baptism by having the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. When he's talking about, what do you talk about next? Puzzle. Who? Remind me.
Miracles.
Well, he did after baptism. Well, I could look. Okay, I'll look. It's the giving of the nuts and the doctor, but now comes this look of this purest interest, and then comes the part I want to stress. It looks like what's happened is that Alyosha did not get seduced by Grushenka. In fact, they got into this chain of love together, and then what Rakitin says on 320 is the important thing. 320?
29.
Is that right?
320.
Maybe I'm on 330. That would be a mistake. No, I'm not. Okay, then I have to look. Well, the challenge is, if those of you who have the book, to help me find the crucial statement that Rakitin makes.
329.
Loud.
329.
229, and I've been looking.
329.
329, and I've been looking on 330. Let's try 329. Okay, here's Rakitin on 329. Rakitin couldn't control himself. Well, so you've been saved. So you saved the sinner. He laughed spitefully. Have you, eh? So you see, the miracles you were looking out for, just have come to pass. So I just want you to get used to this and read it on your own when you read the Brothers. There's always a moment in which Dostoevsky tells you exactly which particular Christian practice or sacrament that has now been shown to not be wiped out with the sacred, but what its phenomenology is, and that it's doing fine if you're sensitive to it. So we get to see a miracle, but how was that a miracle? What was the miracle? Well, it was sort of partly passing on agape love. I think that would do it. But I think there's a further miracle, the way the plot is set up, that is Grushenka has this problem that her old Polish lover, who seduced her when she was 17 and then left her alone, she fell into terrible times. So she's been miserable thanks to this Polish lover. And now his wife has died in Poland, and he's come to propose marriage to Grushenka. And she is not only delighted and grateful, but she's furious and outraged and spiteful because he treated her so badly. So in her language, she says to Alyosha, she doesn't know whether to go back to her Polish lover like a dog or like what's the other? Oh dear. Like a dog, yeah. She goes either back like a dog or with a knife. and that is she's going to either revenge herself and kill the Polish lover, or she's going to give in and marry him and be his slave. And Aleshe's response to that is, she says, Alyosha, which should I do? And Alyosha says, you've forgiven him already. And what does that mean? Well, it seems to mean that given two equally destructive possibilities, the knife or the dog, this love between Alyosha and Grushenka has gotten rid of her sense of humiliation and worthlessness, given her enough strength to be able to simply go back to the Polish lover and look him over and decide, without either of those destructive alternatives, what the best thing to do is. And that's what she does. She just simply, but Alyosha sort of cuts this short and just says, don't even bother to go back and look at him, because in effect it's you've already forgiven him. And to sort of sum it up, what happened? Out of two destructive possibilities, a third possibility, which was positive and made a good life possible for Grushenka, came about, and that's a kind of positive miracle. So, and the main reason I tell you that more detailed story is because it's on a case in the book, of which there are many, where Dostoevsky will just name it, what it is that he wants to tell you about, what Christian sacrament that is still going strong, but is endangered by science, if people don't appreciate it and see it, and he wants to tell you about it and show it to you. He just showed you a miracle, and the miracles do happen, and they don't violate physics and chemistry. That's the other requirement. Physics and chemistry is doing fine, and miracles aren't destroying it. The miracle is the creation of a new possibility for Grushenka out of the passing on of the agape love, and Dostoevsky tells you so. And that leads to the general issue of miracles, which Dostoevsky then takes up. But I want to see if where I've gotten to so far. Well, I got to you where Aleshe says, smiling, he says to Grushenka, "But you've forgiven him already." And when she says, that's where I want to be. And now I'm on page 327. "Why did you not come before, you angel?" We know that Rakitin has been a devil, and he is the devil. And we know also that Alyosha is an angel. People are constantly saying that. And at one point, Dostoevsky really gets carried away. I don't want to try to find it in a hurry. But where the person says they hear his wings unfolding, as he's doing his good deed. But mainly the point is that Alyosha is the angel, and Rakitin is the devil. There's a funny passage where when Rakitin can't stand Alyosha being there. Let me see if I can see that. Oh yeah, okay. So Rakitin goes on. This is still 329, and Rakitin, when Alyosha says, when Alyosha says you've forgiven him already, and so forth, and now that was the last straw for Rakitin, and he says, "Why the devil?" Notice, and I take you up. What is that? Damnation. Take you all. Well, Rakitin is saying to the group, and each of you, he cried suddenly. "Why the devil did I take up with you? I don't want to know you from this time forth. Go ahead. There's your road." And he turned and left. Oh, and that's the end of that episode. But now we're going to get to really the hard ones, the very important ones. And that is the forever experience, which is on 333. what's happening, we're just moving to another Christian sacred experience, but it's one that turns out to be very important at the end of the book. So we have to look at it now on 333. He's weeping. He falls on the ground and he kisses the ground. This is Alеше, does this, following what Father Zosima told him he should be doing. And he vowed passionately to love the earth, that is it, forever and ever. And he cries over it and so forth. But what I want you to pay attention to here, because I want to talk about it a lot later, is that there is this important forever experience. I can't help telling you sort of ahead of time that what goes on in this moment is a kind of temporality which is different than the everyday kind of temporality where events occur now and now and now and now, and you begin to forget the early ones. There are sacred experiences which, when they occur, are so important in your life that you'll never forget them again. And they will be moments of joy which you will remember. We'll go back to that in a minute. But so I wanted to read this crucial passage on 333. It was as though some idea is bad. I don't know if that's the right translation. It's not an idea, it's more fundamental than that. It's as though some idea had seized the sovereignty of his mind. This is Aleshe's mind. And it was for all his life and forever and ever. That's a very important phrase. That means that there's something that is sort of saved from the everyday temporality of meaninglessness and forgetting, and that you will be in touch with it all your life, and it will give everyone meaning, and that's a sacred experience too, the forever and ever. It's the experience of what I just said, lasting meaning in your life that you can come back to and organizes your life and gives it meaning from the start, from the experience on. I think that's all I need to forget that. And maybe it says more. Well, I read this, and never his life long could Aleshe forget that minute. Now it's going to come back at the end of the book that Aleshe is going to create that kind of experience for the boys, which you haven't heard about, but you hopefully read about. And at the very end of the book, Aleshe creates the sacred forever memory for all the boys. And that's the very last page of the brothers. So in the very middle here, Dostoevsky's setting it up. So I had to talk about it. And okay, so now I'm going to just do a few more, how are we doing, of the sacraments. I stop at 3:30 or whatever. Oh, that's Berkeley time.
30 is
okay, you tell me when I've got 10 minutes to go or something, because I don't want to stop before that forever experience at the end. But in the meantime, after the miracles and after the forever experience comes other whole list, as I said, of Christian practices and experiences which sort of structure the book. So, but I'm only going to look at some. But after the forever experience, the next thing you could look at would be the confession. That's a whole story. Dostoevsky's going to tell you what confession is, what's it good for, why is it sacred, and he's going to call it confession. And it's in the language of the book, it's the mysterious visitor. So the mysterious visitor comes to Father Zosima, and after seeing him many times, and it's very tense and very good Dostoevsky and very moving, finally the mysterious visitor gets himself to admit to Zosima that he murdered his girlfriend, not Zosima's girlfriend, but so the mysterious visitor, Michael is his name, confesses it. And then comes a description from Dostoevsky of why it's important to confess. And it turns out to be absolutely crucial. You have to know more that after this murder, Michael feels terribly guilty, and then because of that, he gives lots of money to good causes. He becomes a super good citizen. He takes special good care of his children. Everybody likes him and admires him. And we're told all that because now it looks like then why does he want to confess? He seems to have a good life. But from his point of view, that is Michael's, who's suffering, it's not a good life because he can't relate to anybody as the ex-murderer of the girlfriend. That's not who he really is. He really is the ex-murderer of his girlfriend. And so his relation to his wife is just a lie, and his relation to his loving children that he loves too is just a lie. And he is in complete isolation. And he is, as he says, in hell. Because hell is isolation, and he can't relate to anybody, and he can't pass on the agape love to anybody, he can't receive it from anybody, so he's in terrible shape until he confesses. But even that isn't enough, and this is an interesting Dostoevsky point. It isn't enough for him to go tell Alеше that he killed his girlfriend, Michael, tell Alеше that Michael killed Michael's girlfriend. It's that he has to tell the whole community. So, and then he gets all upset about that, and how, in other words, he has to sort of destroy this image of him as the good citizen and the good philanthropist and so forth. And he calls the whole community together, and he reads an announcement explaining that he killed this girl and exactly how he did it and when he did it and so forth. And that you would think would be the end of the story, because he becomes joyful. And because he's connected now, he thinks face his wife, but he thinks it's pretty painful. He has to face his wife, and she has to forgive him, knowing about the murder and so forth. But now there's a sort of sub-miracle I just realized, but I don't think Dostoevsky stresses it, or I may have missed it. The sub-miracle is that nobody believes him. They don't believe that this good father, philanthropist, nice guy, is a murderer. And so Dostoevsky rigs it so that he dies happy, not only because he's able now to love his wife and kids, but they don't think he is a murderer, and they love him for what he's become. It's like, it's exactly the situation of somebody on death row who has a kind of conversion, and then they become really a good guy, and yet they can't be sort of forgiven. So he's become a good guy, and for that he's at least able now to relate to his wife and kids and experience joy. And then he says hell is isolation, and being really together with other people is joy, and he knows that, and he knows, and he's being forgiven by everybody, even though, because they know. This is why I was telling this idea of a deathbed, or a what?
Death row.
A death row. Yeah, thank you. My prompter. So he experiences the death row conversion. That is, Michael experiences the situation in which he's become a lovable man because he's confessed to the community and to his wife and kids, and he's been forgiven by all of them. only is sort of a misunderstanding. They forgive him because they can't believe he could do such a thing. But it doesn't matter because they can love him and he can love them. That's the bottom line. And that's just to show that you can do the mysterious visitor and talk about. Well, I'll read you something. All of this is, remember, in the interest of telling the story about the various possible practices, Christian practices, that preserve the sacred. This is just another one. Being able to understand confession and being able to confess and being able to forgive, although that's a complicated one. All of this is what's being explained in the mysterious visitor story. And the mysterious visitor, Dostoevsky chooses for his showing you the sacred by showing you, in this case, confession. Michael says, now I dare not love my neighbor and even my own children. And then he says, I know I'll be in heaven. It'll be heaven for me, heaven when I confess. And finally he does confess. And then he says, 14 years I've been in hell. That's the story about hell. Hell is isolation, it turns out. And it was heaven in my heart. There's heaven being existentialized. There was heaven in my heart from the moment I had done what I had to do, namely, confess. Okay, now, those are all easy cases. And I would just, and you can find all the rest if you look carefully at the point where he tells you, like, it was a miracle. And he just, boom, tells you, or it was a baptism, and he just tells you. But now comes a much more complicated issue. But it's all still about what happened to the sacred. And is it preserved or destroyed by science? Is there a way the sacred can be preserved without getting rid of science, keeping science, but saving the sacred? Well, the issue turns on a way that I wish I could tell you sort of crisply, but it's a complicated issue, and I don't know how to tell it crisply. But I know that Dostoevsky is showing that he's up on what's going on in science. By the way, he was apparently an engineering student at first because his father wanted to be an engineering student and paid the tuition if he was an engineering student. I think he really likes science. I see no reason to think that Dostoevsky wants to show that science is really not getting it the way the universe is. I think he thinks science is getting it right about the way the universe is. But that he doesn't think that undermines the sacred. But now comes the crunch. Dostoevsky gives himself a tough test. What is the test? Well, it's Claude Bernard, and Claude Bernard is the discoverer of neurons. And Rakitin tells, in order to break Alyosha's faith Dimitri's faith once and for all, Rakitin tells Dimitri about the discovery of neurons, and then Dimitri has just the kind of breakdown that Rakitin hoped he would. So this is the crucial moment for that. Imagine inside the head, the nerves. They have all sorts of little tails. The little tails of those nerves. That's why I see them. I think because of those little tails, not at all because I've got a soul. Rakitin explained it all to me yesterday, brother, and it simply bowled me over. It's magnificent, Alyosha, the science. A new man is arising. That I understand. And yet I'm sorry to lose God. Now, how is Alyosha going to handle that? How can he keep the neurons and get and not have Dimitri lose God? Well, it's that Dimitri has an experience of the new man, but the new man that Rakitin tried to get him to believe in was the simple sort of psychological neuro person with no soul, and that's not what Alеше is trying to get him to believe in. So what happens then is, what does Alеше do about it? Well, Dmitri says, I'm sorry to lose God. And Alеше says, well, that's a good thing anyway, said Alеше. And he changes the subject. He never goes into trying to show that somehow the neurons, though they are necessary for thinking, don't replace the fact that you've got a soul and that you can experience love and so forth. But Dostoevsky doesn't work it out. But I believe that that's what he's doing. I mean, that's the only way I can understand what he's doing, is to show that there is a way of just turning and walking away from what Alеше said. He doesn't have to answer it, because if he tries to answer it, then he assumes that there are neurons, and he assumes that neurons are a different sort of thing, physical kind of, brain-related thing, and he assumes that there's mind-related soul things, and he's got to decide how they fit together. But I think he thinks that the various presumption that there is this sort of Cartesian separation between the mind things and the body things, and how in the world you're going to deal with neurons and keep the soul, is just, I think Dostoevsky thinks rightly, that would be a mistake to enter in an argument about that. But what you want to do is, you see that they're in an entirely different world. You can't convince them, they won't convince you, but you see that if you can't share the other person's world, you can't have an argument in which one or the other wins or loses. He just walks away from it. But he does face it. That's why I want to put it down. He really sees that you've got to have a story of what you're supposed to do when you discover that your brain is doing all this by neurons. And his answer is a pretty strange one, is to say, well, Dmitri says, remember, I'm sorry to lose God, and Alеше says, well, that's too bad, and walks away. I think that's a proposal of how you're supposed to deal with these people, not just because you're stubborn, but because they're in a wrong ontology, they're in a wrong universe. They've got presuppositions which you don't share with each other, so you can't refute each other. But you can walk away from the neurons, and you can walk away from the conclusion that if you have neurons, you have no soul, and that's what he does. So, but now how are we doing for time?
Easily another 10 minutes.
10 minutes, just what I want. Because now there are two more issues. One is the resurrection issue, but there's not much to say about that, really. Dmitri discovers that he's a new man, but it's a different sort of new man than the new man that Alеше, Dmitri, yes, is a new man, and not the new man that Rakitin is talking about, which is the man of neuroscience. But what is this new man then? Well, it's on page 549. So on 549, Dmitri tells Alеше, brother, these last 2 months I found in myself a new man has risen in me, he was hidden in me, and so forth. In other words, there's an experience of resurrection, of being a new man. Dmitri has always been refers to himself as carrying a cross, and now it turns out that can be converted into Dmitri's problems, which we haven't time to go into. But it also turns out that Dmitri has himself been reborn, and he says he has. I don't know if I have a quote for that or not. No, all I've got here is that there's a new man. but it's the new man who turns out to want to take on the suffering of the prisoners in the underground, and done all kinds of good deeds and so forth, and a whole story about Dimitri's, in effect, really going from crucifixion to resurrection in his experience is worked out. But there's not much really more to say about it. But it's important that it's sort of named the resurrection and around the new man. The new man can either be the science naturalism new man, or the new man can be, as it is for Dostoevsky, the crucified, suffering, resurrected person that Dmitri becomes. But then now I want to just use my last minutes to raise a problem. But first, I want to say that we're going to get a story now about the founding of a church and and come back to sacred memories. Those, but let's do the founding of the church, because that's one of Aleshe's little Dostoevsky's little jokes. So this is on 329. $329. Oh yeah, here it is. So now we get a new scene, and the boys are all waiting at the funeral of Aleshe, and Aleshe isn't there yet, but then Aleshe arrives, and it says Aleshe was met by the shouts of the boys, Aleshe's schoolfellows. They had been impatiently expecting him and were glad that he had come at last. And now look at this. There were about 12 of them. And where was it taking place? It was taking place at the stone, which was Aleshe's favorite stone, where he wanted to be married. Now, why would I mean, if you read it, the page is so funny. Dostoevsky's going along describing everything in a normal sort of way, and all of a sudden he just stops and says, and there were 12 of the boys at the rock. And then he goes back doing it. It's just him telling you, look, that's what we're now showing the sacred in, and he shows it. And now that connects up with the forever. And that's on, everything now happens on 7/18, but it is so hard to understand that I won't be able to tell you for sure how to understand it. I'll give you a possible way of understanding it. This has all got to do with the forever experience. And the founding of the church is tied up with the fact that there are 12 boys. That's just to tell you it's the founding of the church. It doesn't say, Dostoevsky doesn't say it was the founding of the church. The way Dostoevsky operates, you should believe me now, I've given you enough examples, is to just show you the founding of a church by showing you the way the boys get together and do what? They get together and produce, with the help of Aleshe, childhood memories, which they will have forever, memories of their current joyfulness of all being together, and memories that stick with them all their lives, that they were joyful and when they were all together. And that's what being in a loving community, this kind of church which preserves the sacred and preserves the forever, is all about. And it all happens on page 417 and 418. But I want to And now I have to read you a lot of it just because you have to hear that this is the forever experience we're talking about. Alеше says, and it's a church service. It's a kind of community praying rhythm. So they say, hooray for Karamazov, and then he says, Alеше, and may the dead boy's memory live forever. Alеше added, forever, the boys chimed in again. You see, the forever is the important thing. It's sort of how to get out of meaningless time into meaningless time. So, Karamazov, cried Alеше. No, I'm not ready for that, I don't think. Yeah, maybe so. Just a second. Well, there's more of this going back and forth of forever, but that's enough to show you that it gets chanted again and again. And now comes the thing that's hard to understand, which I saved till last. It looks like they've all just agreed that this forever experience was the thing that was going to give meaning to the rest of their lives. And that's fine, and we know what kind of meaning and how it works, and it will last forever. But now something happens which is very surprising. Karamazov, cried Kolya, can it be true what's taught us in religion, that we shall all rise again from the dead and shall live and see each other again, all, Alеше too? Now, that is to say, you've told us about forever. You told us about the sacred experience of a kind of temporality which doesn't die moment by moment. And now Kolya is asking, well, how does that story you told us about the sacred and about time and memory and forever relate to the official Christian view? And that's what he does. He says, and that Dostoevsky is amazing to try to take this on. Karamazov, cried Kolya, can it be true what's taught in religion, that we shall all rise again from the dead and shall live and see each other again, all? And now, what does Alеше answer? He ought to say, well, I've just told you the sacred experience involved in the forever. What more would you want? But he doesn't say that. He says, certainly we shall all rise again. Certainly we shall see each other and shall tell each other with joy and gladness all that has happened. Alеше answered. So it looks like the rapture is something that he just buys. Because the boys ask him, is this sort of literal Christian story about immortality true? And Alеше says, yeah, it's true. But then comes the beginning of the taking it back, where Dostoevsky says, yeah, all this will happen, we'll all get our bodies back and so forth. Alеше said, half laughing, half enthusiastic, and the next sentence is about how they are going to go, let's go eat pancakes. There's some weird thing going on there. Aleshe's been telling you a whole complicated story about the forever experience, and how basic it is, and how important it is, and how real it is, and sacred it is. And then he finally also tells you about the rapture, and the literal story, and he seems to take that seriously too. There must be some way in which both of them could be right, if this story is going to make any sense. And that's a hard story to tell. It looks like the story that's more important is the story about how they're all going to see each other again and love each other and remember each other. It's about the chain of love, and it's about that version of the sacred and the church-like community that it makes possible. But it looks like it's not incompatible with the fact that when you die, the whole story of coming out of the grave in the flesh and seeing each other again and so forth, that could be true too. And it looks like Dostoevsky wants to say, yes, they can both be true. They're not incompatible. That's already the first thing to say. And the second thing is, and not only when they're both true, the one that does sort of the phenomenology of the sacred, which is what Dostoevsky's been doing for the whole book, is more important than the one, the rapture, which gets one sentence, half laughing, half enthusiastic. He's not going to go outright and deny it, but he's certainly not going to go to the wall affirming that we're going to all come back. And he doesn't need it, because he saved the sacred already by his whole book, giving you the, say, 15 or so sacred practices that Christians do have, that does give their life meaning, and that's good enough. Now, I want to say one more thing about that. There's sort of parentheses. There's a whole mess about translation at that point, which I think we just have to read. I was reading for years the old Constant Garnet original translation of the Brothers Karamazov, which goes way back to when I don't even remember, but it's long ago. So does
1912.
1912. So there is the one I've been reading you, and it's been about forever, and so forth. And now, if you all go home and look in your copy, which you probably don't have the Dover Thrift Edition, then you will discover that all the forevers have been replaced by the translators who are so pleased with themselves, as they say in the preface, that they've sort of cleaned things up with the word eternal. And every place where we hear memory live forever, may the dead boy's memory live forever, the New Translation says, may the dead boy's memory live eternally. But I don't even know what that means, but I don't think Dostoevsky ever said that. That is, he says that they will. He says to the boys, they'll always remember how they were together, hand in hand, and that's fine. And so the boys are chanting forever, and Kolya sort of doesn't deny this story. He just says, and is it true too that? And then he tells the story about the resurrection of the flesh. And Dostoevsky leaves it at that. I think, for me, the important thing is that in leaving it like that, he's done the one thing that he needs to do, and he promises to do, and that is answer, what do you get when you say give the phenomenology of the sacred, or existentialize the sacred, which is what I've been doing. And that's when we hear the good things, that we will always be together. Let's see what it says. Alеше. Well, Alеше says, certainly we shall see each other again, Alеше answered, half laughing, half enthusiastic. Now that's the thing I'm talking about. And then Kolya, and then Alеше says, I'm at the very last paragraph of the book now, always so, all our lives, hand in hand, hooray for the Karamazovs, Kolya cried. Now, that makes fine sense. What doesn't make sense is always so, all our lives, hand in hand. What doesn't work is eternally so, all our lives, hand in hand. Sort of eternally, you don't even have hands. Eternally is this big other picture of the religious or maybe Platonic world. And the idea that the translators have taken this great Dostoevsky move, but I see one more thing. There's a kind of pressure on Dostoevsky to have Kolya come in and ask, well, how does this relate to the rapture? How does this relate to the resurrection of the flesh, and so forth? And Dostoevsky wants you to know that that's what the issue is here. Remember, every time when we talked, we always had an issue. There was the miracles, There was baptism. There was the incarnation. I didn't say much about that. That's Markle, and so forth. And now Dostoevsky needs to tell you, in effect, as he always does, well, what has he just been existentializing? And then is where he could be saying, well, what I'm existentializing is exactly that I'm telling you that you don't need this traditional religious way of thinking about it, as long as you've got the phenomenology of the sacred preserved. So, and he is doing that, at least. He's saying, look, we've just discussed the issue of whether we will rise again. And he's ready to say, certainly we'll rise again, and we'll see each other, and so forth. But we want to find out that this certainty that we will rise again isn't something that he really has to stand behind, Dostoevsky or Alеше. All he has to do is tell you that's what he's been describing as a sacred possibility. But what he hasn't got is to have to say that that's a necessary part of the sacred. He could do his whole story on the sacred in what he did in the whole book, take up all the Christian practices and give you a living interpretation of what it would be like to have miracles under those conditions, and baptism under those conditions, and resurrection even under those conditions, which Dmitri goes through resurrection. But it doesn't mean that he gets his body back after he dies and comes out of the tomb. It means that he begins a new life. And that's all Dostoevsky needs. But he tells you what he's been doing. He's been talking about the rapture, and his answer to that, to talk about the rapture, is, he says, of course that certainly happens, that we will rise from the grave. Alеше says, half laughing, half enthusiastically. That's I'm trying to tell you what that strange phrase means, when it doesn't mean, well, sure, that's the right answer, that's the only important answer, all this otherwise is just phenomenological drivel. On the contrary, the issue has been, all right, what is the role of the sacred? And the answer has been, we've had all of the sacred existentialized, phenomenologized in the course of the book, and we can stop there, and then we would stop laughing, half enthusiastic. Okay.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Professor Дрейфус, for a really fascinating talk. We do have a relatively short interval of time for some questions, and I know there's at least one already because Mikołaj has asked to have the privilege. So go ahead, Mikołaj.
Thank you. Thank you very much for a very detailed talk. Of course, it's a little cheeky of me because I could signal Ralph ahead of everyone else. But I just wanted to ask whether you think Dostoevsky's view on how the sacred can be still preserved in a scientific paradigm could be reiterated in terms of a cognitive dualism.
In a scientific age, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So in a scientific age, yes. So
okay.
Whether this could be reiterated in terms of a cognitive dualism, where you look at the world either in terms of causes or in terms of reasons. So if you look at Rakitin's idea of the neuronal network being the ultimate explanation of everything we do, it is only the ultimate explanation of everything we do in terms of causes. So when somebody makes a decision, and that analyzing the neuronal activity can give you the cause of why something took place when a decision was made. You can trace it back to a certain reaction that took place, and that resulted in something else happening. However, you can't ask of the scientist, and that explanation will give you nothing in terms of reasons for why a decision was made. So it seems that reasons are irreducible just to the neuronal activity that stands behind them, that is a parallel explanation to how we can talk about at least human conduct. So do you think this might be an idea that's being articulated on some level by Dostoevsky?
I don't, but I'm trying to think why I don't. Well, I guess I should think why would we think that? Given that, can you think of any episodes in the book where it turns out that this distinction between the reason and causes plays an important role? Maybe you just said that and I missed it, but say it again.
Well, to me it seems characters like Rakitin seem to be advocating a certain form of reductionism, whereby the ways in which the characters seem to value the world and understand the world are just brought down to the way things occur in the world mechanically.
That's right.
Decisions and thought processes being reducible, for example, in Rakitin's idiom, to how things happen in the brain with neurons.
Yeah.
Whereas Alyosha seems to me to be pointing to a way of understanding reality which just doesn't rely just on reason, just on causes, but refers to certain reasons for which we...
I guess that's where I don't find Dostoevsky looking for the reasons. It's true that he certainly accepts the cause story, and that's fine for the physical explanation of what's going on in the brain. But the alternative isn't reasoning. Nobody does much reasoning in the Brothers Karamazov, I don't think.
Well, we'll have to keep one question.
One question, sure.
I think so. I'll put it to the audience. I think there's one in the centre just here. Two. It's just so it's captured on the...
So my question is, at the very end of the talk, you wondered whether or not this forever experience is compatible or incompatible with the...
Wait a sec. Mark, are you going to tell me what he's telling me? Because I can't hear him. I just don't hear even, unless, or better even yet, if you had a microphone, each of you, so I could hear you. Okay, go ahead.
Well, we can pass it around, but if you just speak up to the mic, that's the point of that.
So my question is just, you suggested that maybe these experiences for Dostoevsky are supposed to be compatible. The idea of the forever experience being something that happens here and now, and on the other hand, the traditional Christian doctrine of the resurrection. And I'm wondering what you think of the idea that the reason why for Dostoevsky those two are compatible is because in that moment of enthusiasm for Alyosha, this is precisely when the resurrection is sort of prefigured. Or in a sense, it's a sort of experiential, it is an experience in which one sort of experiences the hope of the bodily resurrection. Or in some sense, that doctrine itself is disclosed. And that's precisely what explains the enthusiasm.
Can you summarize?
Yeah, so he's asking, you posed the question how to make them compatible, these two different accounts, a more traditional metaphysical account of Christianity and his existential account. And I think Stephen's suggesting that the traditional account, the hope of a bodily resurrection, plays an important role still. And Dostoevsky needs that. I think that's the suggestion, right? So maybe another way to put it is, doesn't the actual hope of a bodily resurrection add something to life that we're not going to get simply on the existential story?
Well, I think that might be true, but it wouldn't be compatible with half laughing. Would you describe that view as half laughing, half enthusiastic about the afterlife?
I think he's saying that's the enthusiastic half.
Yes, and what's the laughing half?
I guess the existential half is the laughing half.
That won't work, but I don't know what does.
Okay, there was one around there, or otherwise there's certainly, well, perhaps one at the front here, and then the hand towards the back there was the next to go up.
Hi, I wanted to ask, firstly, about the forever experience itself, and how you distinguish that from the memory of the forever experience. Are those two different experiences? Are those not just like qualitatively two different experiences? And I also wanted to ask, in terms of existential phenomenology, whether you can, because this doesn't cover all the existential experiences that, not all the authentic existential experiences that characters go through in Dostoevsky's novels, range beyond just the Christian or religious experiences. There are other epiphanic experiences that take place which aren't religious. And those can also be classified as sacred, depending on how you define the sacred. It's very different from your definition. But so two questions. Is the forever experience itself is different from the memory of the forever experience? And secondly, is there room to understand the sacred beyond just this idea of agape love and that you present?
Did you get it?
No.
Okay, so the first question is there a difference between a forever experience and the memory of the forever experience?
No, that's the point. The memory is just as vivid and just as joyful making as the actual one. That's the kind of special temporality involved.
So it's not a forever experience unless it's operative
right then.
But then throughout the rest of your life.
Yes.
And being recalled.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the other question was, he posed it a couple of different ways, but I take it the important question is, isn't this reducing the experience of the sacred to an experience of agape love? Or is there, in Dostoevsky, more to the sacred experience than just that?
Now that's interesting. But it isn't all agape love that's living forever. It's because it may not even involve love. It's the boys' memories of having been together in a church-like religious experience, which is constantly renewable and accessible to them. But there's no real talk. There's not much. I don't think any talk about love where the schoolboys, except loving Alеше, where the schoolboys are involved. It's always other stuff. The love. So maybe that's all I should want to say. Okay.
Well, I know there was a question back there somewhere. I know there were several more dotted about, but I think it was that one, and I can see there's one over here, and we probably have time just for those two.
Yeah, okay, I'll try and be quick. I think I have sort of, if the idea is that Dostoevsky is genuinely, not just that this is an interesting way to read the novel, but that he's genuinely himself intentionally trying to give some kind of non-supernatural, purely existential interpretation of Christianity, right? Like, I sort of have two problems attributing that to Dostoevsky, right?
Can you limit them to one?
Well, exactly right. The first is simply that he's an ultra-conservative, and he'd be very unusual as an ultra-conservative, even though these are not in any way logically tied together. He'd be very unusual as a sort of political ultra-conservative of that time to, right, who's very attached to the traditional church in having that sort of view. Like, in fact, I suspect that would make him almost unique, except maybe not so much, maybe the French right by this time already has sort of secular far right, right? But, and the other is just that, like, haven't Christians always, taken these as having moral meaning for our lives and supernatural meaning, right? Like, Dante has, can be read on a purely sort of moral level of the descent into hell, where you can see the danger of all the kinds of sins he sees around him in Italy, right? But no one because of that would doubt that Dante is like a genuine believer in the literal sense.
Okay, so he's questioning the idea that Dostoevsky should be read as offering a purely existential account of Christianity. First of all, because he was such a conservative figure himself and seemed to have such a commitment to a more traditional understanding of Christianity. but also because Christians have always been operating on two levels. They've always been having a here and now moral interpretation of these Christian ideals or doctrines, and a more robustly metaphysical, supernatural reading.
Yeah, I guess Christians have been doing that, and Dostoevsky doesn't want to do that, and that's are we
I think that's the question. Why should we think Dostoevsky is not playing this same?
Well, we're back where we were. Why he's half laughing and half
laughing and half
and why it got only one paragraph in a 780 page book. He doesn't elaborate the traditional view or defend it or anything. It passes off in one tiny paragraph. That's
I suppose you might look at the different kinds of monks and how they're treated.
In the book?
In the book.
In the Brothers.
The more metaphysical ones are always treated with suspicion.
Bad ones. Yeah, Father Farapont and less crazy people.
Right. And the admirable ones like Zosima never seem to concern themselves too much with the metaphysical.
Yes. Zosima's been given a bad speech, by the way, I guess it's the translator. No, it's some authority supposedly on the Brothers Karamazov. I'm trying to remember what it is. Never mind, I'll think about it later.
So we better move on. We're just going to have one more lightning paced question.
When you spoke about the going off and eating pancakes and the earlier one about the pound of nuts, I was thinking about the sacrament of the present moment. And I think that's another reason why he would laugh at the thought of the forever as well. So I don't know if you find that. I find that an interesting way of looking at it. The sacrament of the present moment.
Yeah, I can't restate this one because I don't know what you mean by the sacrament of the present moment. So.
Yeah, I don't either.
That's just one of the things that we have, certainly in the Catholic Church. The sacrament of the present moment is really what we celebrate in Holy Communion. It's the reality of now and the blessing that we have now, which will also, of course, be in eternity. So that's how that helped me to understand that point.
Okay.
Yeah.
It sounds like we need to talk to some Catholics about the sacrament of the present moment.
Well, perhaps on that note, we should close up, unless you'd like to make a final comment on that. Okay, well, I think we should certainly have another round of applause for Professor Дрейфус. And thank you all so much for coming. This was the ultimate seminar in this series. You can watch them all online at humanephilosophy.com or at the Ian Ramsey Centre website as well. And hopefully there'll be some more next year as well. Thank you.